Thanks so much, everyone, for watching. We've got an epic lineup tonight of speakers. We've got an awesome panel here. Amazing group of functional doctors, technology, activists, for a leap forward in medicine.
You know, our goal is to make it easy for practitioners to learn in community.
This ecosystem that is being set up by the meetup groups, we believe will be the future ecosystem of this evolved primary care network, and it all revolves around you.
Welcome to the Functional Forum. Thanks for joining us in the charge to accelerate the evolution of medicine. Please welcome your host, James Maskell.
Hello and welcome to the Functional Forum. We are back at live conferences. We are here at the PLMI conference, Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Institute. We're in Chicago. The conversation is all about functional immunology. Could there be a more important topic on the planet? We're going to hear from some of the speakers. We're going to hear from some of the attendees. It's going to be a great show. Enjoy. So one of the biggest treats about this weekend was to see Dr. Elroy Vojdani and Dr. Ari Vojdani work together and lecture together, talking about this critical topic of functional immunology. You know, Dr. Ari was such a legend 2 years ago when we did the PLMI live conference in April 2020 and essentially predicted everything that would happen in the next 2 years, especially with regard to, you know, who would get a very bad COVID infection, who would have a very mild COVID infection. And we've seen that play out in a very prescient way over the last 2 years. He came to talk a little bit more about autoimmunity and COVID, which is a critical topic for anyone interested in the field of functional medicine. Enjoy.
We know that there's a covariable for SARS-CoV-2 that's diabetes and insulin resistance. We also, Tom already talked about obesity with the inflammatory potential of obesity. What's going on in the course of these? What is A1C? A1C is glycated hemoglobin, right? It's the amidation of the hemoglobin molecule. Hemoglobin was a native molecule that got chemically transformed to a non-native molecule. Is that the same to the immune system as was the original hemoglobin? No, it's not. No. So I could go down my list of conjugation, glycation, oxidation, shift base formation, mercury and sulfhydryl reactions, all the sulfhydryl cysteines on proteins reacting with mercury, that forms a new protein, right? It's not the one that came off of our genes. So what I think people think of as autoimmunity is wrong. I think it's actually immunity in response to a biotransformed set of molecules. There's your exposome that you've so eloquently over the years, Aristo, brought up to our attention. So this construct is missing in clinical immunology, I believe, to the extent that it ends up in practice. And that's kind of the thing that we try to do, right? And like how did we manage chronic fatigue syndrome back in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s? We tried to detox, gut restoration, and mitochondrial resuscitation. Those are the three principles, right? That when people said, well, those are crazy. That's not what we do in traditional medicine. We use antidepressants and muscle relaxants. No. We try to treat those factors that modulate the immune system function. You didn't take away the bad experience, but you took away or you added back the opportunity to lower the burden of things that covariably react with the immune system, just like EBV and SARS, that then induces a reaction, a secondary immune reaction. I'm throwing this out, by the way. Please attack what I'm saying if you feel I'm way off base here.
As part of the exposome, by the way, if you want to read more about it, there's an article in journal called Pathophysiology. And I wrote this article about pathophysiology of autoimmune diseases. And the first article is about toxic chemicals and food. The second article is in the process of peer reviewed right now, is about the role of infections in autoimmunity. So, but when you look at the exposome factor, there are many factors involved with that. And one of them is protein modification. I agree with you. Hemoglobin A1C is the best example of neoantigen formation. And there are many, many other proteins get modified due to what? Due to exposure to other environmental factors.
And Tom brought up the very important, and you may want to go into this more, Tom, the protein folding issues, which we didn't even think about the three-dimensional structure of the protein in and of itself being an immunoresponsive element. So when you start unfolding the protein's tertiary structure, now the immune system sees it differently. So Tom, maybe
Yeah,
you want
and I think, so I know we talk a lot about autoimmunity and cross-reactivity with antibodies, so we see these protein structures, but think about the auto-inflammatory components that are driven by the innate immune system with pattern recognition receptors. So you talked about glycated hemoglobin, but glycated hemoglobin actually doesn't bind to the RAGE receptor, but all kinds of other glycated proteins do. So all these generic glycated proteins bind to basically a signal that's just going to tell NF-kappa B to turn on. And not just in immune cells, but in other cells as well.
Let's make sure everybody follows. You just gave a pearl there. And that is advanced glycosylated end products, right? AGEs. Proteins can become aged, right? And what do they bind to? You said it. The receptor of advanced glycosylation end products. So those cells, those immune cells become enraged.
And highly expressed in the brain.
So age produces enraged cells, which produces chronic inflammation, which produces immunosequential inflammatory processes.
Right. And so, diabetics that have a higher blood sugar, we think, okay, higher blood sugar, but that means higher glycation of all their proteins, higher binding. So the RAGE receptors are just pattern recognition receptors. We gave it a name for that one, but immune cells are not the only ones that have pattern recognition receptors. All kinds of other tissues. So if you just look at like cartilage tissues, when they become senescent, they produce this phenotype that I talked about, which is basically inflammatory. It creates
senescent associated secretory phenotype, right?
Yeah,
SASP.
SASP. Mm-hmm. And so this is kind of like telling the cells around, and as that then begins damaging cartilage, guess what damaged cartilage becomes? Becomes a damage associated molecular pattern, which then binds to more of these pattern recognition receptors, which then drives this. So we have the autoimmunity, which is more the traditional T cell, B cell, but then we have this whole phenomena of the innate immune system that just wants to keep you alive, and inflammation is its kind of go-to thing. So, I think we're creating all kinds of these specific new antigens, but we're also unloading it with patterns of damage or danger all the time.
Yes, and I think you said, again, I want to emphasize, because you gave a really important pearl, and it was reinforced with Ari's presentation, that this innate immune system that we thought was very fixed, it was this ancient thing that didn't have much of an architecture other than an ancient response by putting arms around stuff and killing it by microbicidal action. Now we're saying, no, actually, it's very intelligent. It can learn. It's more learning ability on the short term than the adaptive immune system. And I think that is a wild card, because that's an entry point for all of us, right? That's that first level, as you said, Arvi, first level of defense, the mucosal immune system, the innate immune system, is the most responsive to what we do, right? So it's not just we're going seeking out those B and T helper cells and the Treg cells. We're trying to send the messages that go to them. Like, let's use an example with TLR4, right? Toll-like receptor 4, one of the pattern recognition receptors. It gets its message. It's very highly expressed in the gastrointestinal mucosa, right? And what does it get its message from? Bacterial cell wall debris, mucopolysaccharides. Mucopolysaccharides from toxic bacteria in the microbiome activate TLR4, and then that sends a signal to the rest of the immune system for the adaptive immune system to start responding. It unearths inflammation, right?
Right. So, and this goes to something that you both have, done work on, is this idea of leaky gut. You've been talking about it forever. But why is that so important? It's because the immune system, the adaptive immune system, needs that control at that point, so the innate immune system can offer it the right information. But when you open that up and you begin exposing the adaptive immune system directly, that's where you get this lack of, Treg cells don't have control then, and then anything can happen.
I want to give another example of neoantigen, which is everybody is familiar with anti-CCP.
I'm going to give my
What is anti-CCP?
She's on
when
this
I'm
side.
done.
Cyclic citrullonated protein.
It is one amino acid from arginine to citrulline.
With nitric
One
oxide.
amino acid out of so many amino acids becomes neoantigen. But no one is asking why one amino acid changes from arginine to citrulline. Again, back to exposome factor. That's what I believe.
Yeah.
There are some enzymes in our body become activated, and those enzymes, transglutaminase is not the only one. There are many, many other enzymes that can change one amino acid from certain, like this in this case, arginine to citrulline, and now becomes autoantigen, and now autoantibody production.
Okay, so this is a really important example of what we're talking, exemplar. That is activation by what? Nitric oxide synthase. Nitric oxide synthase is producing in situ nitric oxide, which turns right around and nitrosates proteins in that space, which makes it then a funny protein. It's not its an original configuration. Nitric oxide is an immunoreactive molecule. It's in part of the exposome. So when you're activating immune-inducible nitric oxide by the conversion of arginine to citrulline, you're producing a potential of an injury in situ of that molecule for which the body will produce an antibody against that foreigner, anti-CCP. Do you see how all this fits together in a different model? If you, I don't know if you understood what I just said here, it was a lot of biochemistry, but that, you probably remember the urea cycle, right? Arginine going to citrulline, and then there was a nitrogen lost, and that's nitric oxide when it's induced by NOS synthase.
So last month, Bill Gates came out with a book called How to Prevent the Next Pandemic. And as I was looking through it, I realized that there was a chapter missing, and it was on nutrition. And I think we just had a masterclass here at PLMI from Dr. Tom Guilliams talking about the importance of nutrition for immunity. So, you know, one thing I was interested in your lecture, you said, Tom, is that it's a bit late to start talking about immunity and nutrition, obviously in the middle of a pandemic. Why is it too late?
Well, you know, we were talking about supplementing. You know, people want to know about, you know, should I supplement? You know, and obviously during the COVID pandemic, you know, should I take vitamin D? Should I take vitamin C? And you know, for a long time, people have said, you know, taking multivitamins just is a way to make your urine expensive. And so one of the things I said is, you know, a pandemic is a really bad time to find out that your urine is inexpensive. You know, so it's like, you know, when we talk about building reserves, this is not something you can just turn on. So all of the reserve capacity, the reserve status for nutrients sometimes takes years. And we have people that are obese, people that are under stress, people that are, you know, have all kinds of other issues that are kind of reducing their nutrient reserves. And so waiting until the emergency, it's like waiting till the, you know, find out that you need to go somewhere immediately and find out you're out of gas. It's not a good time to stop at the gas station, but you might have to. So waiting until there's a global immune emergency, it's not a good time to try to find out how many nutrients am I deficient in or insufficiently taking. So yeah, so I think if we were going to prevent the next pandemic, one of the ways we can do that is, you know, reduce obesity globally, reduce diabetes, reduce all these chronic diseases that are sapping our nutrient reserves, and then really getting people up to a status of nutrient that really is optimized rather than just up to the minimum of the RDAs.
I know the whole point of nutrition is there's some complexity to it, and it's not about each individual parts. There's a sort of a synergy to it. But what would you say like are the heavy hitters in your mind as far as like where is the greatest leverage for the creation of immune resilience by patients if they really get activated into this? Because, you know, this is the first conference I've come to really in a couple of years, and I see that the doctors here are telling me, wow, patients are a lot more ready. In fact, one doctor said to me today that for the first time ever, someone came in and said, I want to be more resilient, and he'd never heard that before. So I think the Guilliams magic must be traveling.
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of things. There are those things you focus on because they're really important to the immune system, and then there are those things you focus on that are more difficult to consume. So, for instance, you know, if you look at calcium, magnesium, we've always said that probably magnesium, I mean, calcium is extremely important for every part of the body, you know, every cell in the body. But getting magnesium is a lot harder. So focusing on magnesium supplementation may be more important because the other ones are easier. So, the B vitamins, vitamin C, vitamin D, frankly, those are fairly easy to get and most people should be supplementing them. But the ones that I think people aren't thinking about as much are like the fatty acids, omega-3 fatty acids, and you can really measure the status and get those up. Glutathione or, the antioxidant components. So thinking about glutathione status and how can I improve that, either with, adding things like N-acetylcysteine, lipoic acid, maybe even glutathione directly, or the phytonutrients. We really don't think about all of these plant compounds as being necessary because they're not vitamins or minerals. There's no RDA for these things, but they are really vital for for our physiology, and especially now we're learning for our immune system. Some of them trigger glutathione synthesis, but many of them, we know affect the immune system. So, finding ways of getting those phytonutrients, and then sort of the secret thing behind that is having a balanced microbiome that can actually convert those compounds into the real active components, because most of them have to be converted by the gut bacteria, by the enzymes that they produce, not by our own enzymes. So these are the sort of those things that we need to be thinking about as these reserve capacity, and as well as getting these, the leaded vitamins and things like that. But those are much easier to get. And then even faster, you can probably get those faster and get your body repleted faster. But these other things take time. And I think those are, and of course, obesity, I think is probably one of these underlying nutrient depleters that we don't think about.
So, in your mind, as you mentioned that, and I know that's a big issue, what is the sort of, what's happening in the physiology that with an obese person that is limiting their immune resilience?
Well, a whole bunch of things. Obviously, just fat mass in general, just reduces fat-soluble vitamins in the body. The more energy someone consumes, the more reactive oxygen species, because you have to metabolize all that, all those calories. So you basically create this pull on your antioxidant reserves. And then, obviously, most people understand that this signal that drives inflammation. I would say almost pretty much everyone who's got a lot of fat mass is typically going to be insulin resistant, driving sort of a posture of inflammation, sometimes much higher. So you're gonna see higher levels of TNF alpha and IL-6, the classic IL-1 beta kind of thing. Interesting, those also then drive the HPA axis, the stress response system. Well, guess what? You produce more cortisol. Cortisol is an immune suppressant. So it's like almost everything that an obese person, the way that the body adapts, the immune system takes a hit in some ways. And so it's like they're getting it from all sides. Now it's subtle, and there's not like necessarily this immune crisis so that you can diagnose some ICD-9 immune disease. But when you throw on a virus that then attacks all these different tissues throughout the body, and it's an inflammatory trigger, then all of a sudden those people are much more vulnerable to that. So it's a subtle thing, but it really creates this pathophysiological setup for a virus like SARS.
Yeah, that's really, really fascinating. I think, I mentioned this is sort of like a missing chapter in Bill Gates's book, but, I know that you have a book that, the LMRC, which is one of the sponsors here at the Functional Forum, have distributed and shared. And I know that, we're here doing some book signings. So for those doctors who have got that book, and for those doctors maybe who haven't got the book, what is the sort of thrust of that?
Well, what I'm trying to do is give principles. So, I mean, obviously it's not a textbook, like a 1,000-page textbook on immunology and nutrition. But I'm trying to give them principles. So if you're looking at patients that you want to support their immune system, and of course everybody thinks, well, I'm going to give echinacea, I'm going to give elderberry, and of course those can be helpful. But how about improving their barrier function? All these micronutrient reserves, antioxidant reserves, the microbiome. I talk a lot about understanding how immunosenescence works. So we know that immunosenescence in aging creates this depleted immune system, and start looking at like mitochondrial function. Well, in immunosenescence, there's a lot of mitochondrial dysfunction, a lot of reactive oxygen species, a lot of damage of genetics, So you say, okay, how do I reverse all those things? Well, improve mitochondrial function, improve antioxidant reserves, and start reverse engineering sort of these capacity. I talk a lot about chaperones, which are proteins that help other proteins fold, because people don't really realize when cells age and they're not metabolically efficient, they produce a lot of these unfolded proteins, which are highly stressful for the cells. And if the cell is healthy, it can go through autophagy, where it kind of recycles itself. But a lot of these cells go into senescence, where they stay around, they don't auto-recycle, they don't go through autophagy, and they put off what's called a senescence phenotype, which is basically an inflammatory signal around them. And other cells then begin, sort of like one bad apple changes, the other apples. Well, same thing, a senescent phenotype then creates more senescent phenotype in other tissues. So the book is essentially helping clinicians understand those principles and then looking at protocols that can address those. And obviously I go through the vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients and other components that have immunostimulatory or immunomodulating benefits. But those are really, I think, sort of add-ons once you figure out stress and sleep and diet and physical activity and the environment and other things that are really those are the big levers, and trying to remind clinicians that don't forget those big levers and then try to tweak everything with just supplements or whatever.
Now we've had this kind of shock to the system with the first sort of major pandemic, in my lifetime, and also a whole new strategy for dealing with pandemics, lockdowns and masks, which we've never had before. Do you see a new interest in this topic in the sort of like either in academia or in mainstream medicine, given, how mission critical what you're talking about is for, for health?
I think in some avenues, but there's a lot of money in the pill for an ill, or, that kind of solution idea, that there are a lot of clinicians that still think it's just a war between humans and the virus, and they don't really realize what we might call the terrain, the posture of the health of the patient played a significant role. I mean, we can see the numbers. We know. I mean, look at age. We know just by definition, age made people extremely vulnerable. Well, what is age? It's just a chronic loss of reserve capacity and resilience, and so they lost the resilience, their immune system and other capacities, the lungs, the heart, other tissues that eventually succumb to that inflammatory cascade. And so what's happening is we are moving that reserve resilient issue that's maybe in the 70s and 80s, and because of our lifestyle, we're pushing it earlier and earlier and earlier. So I think one group of people are waking up to that and saying, yeah, there's something we can do. This is not just us against the virus, and if we can find the right vaccine and the right drug that's going to kill the virus in time, I think that we're realizing that we need to do something. Whether or not we will do something, the other thing I think is interesting that I think will need to be explored is polypharmacy. So many people are on so many drugs that are creating so much nutrient depletion, but also drug-drug interactions and probably immune suppression, mitochondrial suppression. We've got this huge number of people. And of course, as you age, as you get older, the more pharmaceuticals you're on. We know that's kind of a function of age as well. So how much of that effect of aging was really a function of depleting immune reserves, mitochondrial reserves, because of polypharmacy? And or the number of people on PPIs, so they're not even getting some of the nutrients that they're consuming or whatever. So I think there's a lot of things that people need to wake up and say, okay, what's really going on under the surface here that set up the pandemic, set up the response, let's say the global response, and I hope that we learn something. It's amazing how we can go back to our old way of doing things even after something like a pandemic. I think it's going to be possible.
Yeah. Well, if you want to learn something, you can learn now, because we're going to have some of the best bits from Tom's lecture earlier today. Tom, thanks so much for all the work. Appreciate you. All right, check it out.
It's always a pleasure to be, I think of being sandwiched between Jeff on the one side and Elroy Vojdani, two pillars of the functional medicine community that I learned from for many years. So it's kind of a pleasure. And I apologize for stacking 3 PhDs in a row for the morning talk. That may affect you. Maybe that'll be an imprinting that may never escape you. So I was asked to do this talk. Actually, you'll notice it says micronutrient deficiencies in your in your lecture, The Achilles Heel of the Immune System. So I thought that was an interesting title. So I kind of changed it to, I wanted to talk about nutrients in a different way today. I think most of us think of the letter vitamins and minerals, and I certainly, like any of you, you could probably give a seminar or lecture on how the micronutrients affect the immune system. But then I thought about it and I said, you know, nutrient deficiencies, it's the Achilles heel of every system. So it's not just the immune system, it's really the Achilles heel of every system. And of course, if you have been following the news, you see these types of headlines all the time. So, you know, during the pandemic, looking at vitamin D, probably 10 to 1, more of these publications, vitamin D deficiency and some sort of relationship with either the extent of COVID outcomes or something like that. Partly because we have so many people testing, getting this data on vitamin D, it's used a lot more. But you can see there's things on selenium, things on nutritional status and micronutrients, vitamin A, obviously, and others. So the idea that when we're in the middle of a pandemic that we start thinking about nutrients is pretty obvious. So I was thinking about, and of course everybody asked the question, well, can I supplement? What should I be supplementing myself during this time period? And so perhaps you've heard this. Multivitamins just create very expensive urine, okay? This is, you guys have probably heard about this. Well, if I'm supplementing, you're just making your urine more expensive. So this is probably something you've heard. This is probably something you haven't heard. A pandemic is a bad time to find out you have inexpensive urine. Okay? So, you know, this idea that I might get too much and it's going to come out talks a lot about reserve capacity. And if you know anything about most of what comes out in your urine, it are the water-soluble vitamins that you do need every day. You don't create a large reserve capacity of those vitamins. So the relationship between nutrients of all kinds and immune function is well established. And if you're ever looking for a great infographic, Linus Pauling Institute, this is free online. It's actually very long. It goes down and shows all the connections between the nutrients that support the immune system and how you can get them in the diet. There's all kinds of review articles. There's a great one here from Nutrients in 2020 talking about mostly the letter vitamins, mostly we know vitamin A, vitamin D, zinc, selenium, et cetera, specifically how they affect different immune cells. So I'm certainly not going to spend the morning just kind of running those things down. And there are textbooks on this topic, believe it or not. Nutritional Immunology or immunonutrition is its own field. Interestingly, Philip Calder on the left-hand side wrote that book. I met him just a few weeks ago, or actually, was it last week? I was in Atlanta, and Jeff, we need to maybe get him. He loves to come over and speak, so he would be somebody that we should gather. But there's other people in this room that have written textbooks on that. I've written a few myself. One on supplementing dietary nutrients, specifically about that. I think thanks to Jeff who wrote the foreword, and then the second edition of the Supporting Immune Function. So there's a lot of information, and we're not just gonna, I'm not here to dump information on you. What I want you to be thinking today is a little bit about what are nutrients beyond maybe the traditional ones. So before I start, I like talking about this. This is, obligatory for me to talk about these two things. So what stands between function and dysfunction? And in your mind, obviously you have the slide in front of you, so you know what I'm gonna say, but resiliency, the ability to withstand a metabolic challenge and be ready for the next. That's my definition of resiliency. To be able to handle what came your way and then be ready for the next. Because if you can just handle the one and you can the second one, then you're not very resilient. And in order to build that resiliency, you need the reserve capacity. The stored capacity to buffer sustained metabolic challenges while rebuilding your resiliency. So you need something behind the scenes that is constantly rebuilding that resiliency. So when we start thinking about the things that beyond just the immune system, when you start thinking, well, what are these reserve capacities? Well, this is just a small list of those types of things that you might want to think about. Because if you're thinking about nutrient reserves, you also need to be able to have digestive reserves. So your pancreatic exocrine capacity, your beta cell capacity, the endocrine capacity of the pancreas. Parietal cell reserve, how much hydrochloric acid can you really produce? Mucus production, your buffering capacity, liver detoxification capacity. Obviously, micronutrient transport and storage capacity. Obviously, you need not just to have them there, but you need to be able to transport them where you need to go. Mitochondrial reserve capacity and antioxidant reserves. Your microbiome niche capacity, which is kind of an interesting way to think about it, but do you have all of those niches available to you? The species, the diversity capacity. We'll talk a little bit about the capacity to convert phytonutrients into their active constituents or active compounds. How about your naive lymphocytes? How many naive lymphocytes do you have left? Well, if you are, I don't see anybody here under 18, but if you're under 18, you're really doing well. And as your thymus begins, getting smaller and smaller, your naive lymphocyte reserve is going down and down and down. How about your dendritic cell capacity or its activity, or your inflammatory posture? Where you are as far as your ability to respond. Where are you targeted? So we could go down this list, and you can start thinking that none of these are ICD-9, ICD-10 codes. Most of them are not. But they really tell you what's going on. What is that reserve capacity that is going to allow you to be resilient for what's coming down the road? So in the way that I teach this, if you're thinking about the immune system and you want to understand what does it mean to lose immune reserve, immunosenescence is our model, because immune senescence is the aging, the depletion of immune reserve based, essentially driven by aging. So it's a model that we can understand that just like with any aging process, we can accelerate it with inappropriate lifestyle or other factors. So if you start looking at reduced function of the immune system, it really falls into two areas: the reduced capacity to respond, and then the loss of immune discretion. So the immune system is not only do we want it to attack things that are harming us, we want it to only attack things that are harming us. So the discretion between self and non-self is just as important as the ability to respond. So eventually, over time, the immune system not only loses its capacity to respond fully, but it also is less able to recognize self from non-self. It stays on too long. So typically we see this as not having the discretion to turn off the inflammatory system typically. And then it seems to be hypersensitive to the inflammatory triggers, because when the innate immune system is still functioning, when the adaptive immune system sort of backs off a little bit, the innate immune system still is there to kick in the inflammation pathways. So when you start thinking about what is happening, these are sort of the things that are going on. Age-associated changes impacting the immune system are things that you guys are well familiar with. Oxidative stress, which goes very much with decreased mitochondrial function, genome instability, increased inflammation, and then you see a number of other things with hormonal changes. And then at the very top, this is something that people don't think about. Maybe these are things that I think about, but people don't realize how damaging, how stressful to cells the unfolding of proteins, or the lack of the ability of chaperones to constantly fold proteins correctly. Almost every receptor, every enzyme in the cells have to be folded correctly, and when they're not, it's highly stressful for the cells. So, and it drives, supposedly is supposed to be driving autophagy, where the cell says, hey, there's so much going on in here, I need to either recycle or get rid of all of these components. And in aged immune cells, they don't do autophagy very well, and they go through what's called a senescence phenotype, where they basically pump out to the neighborhood a series of what's called a secretome of signals that basically says, I am a senescent cell and I'm still here. I probably shouldn't be here, but I'm going to tell you I'm here by sending you inflammatory signals and whatnot. And you can see down the right-hand side all of these different things that we see that we can look at. Depletion of naive cells in the adaptive immune system. NK cells, actually NK cells are more numerous, but they're less active. There's obviously a change in the gut microflora and how that influences the immune function. Inflammaging, which was already mentioned. And then I will say that another picture that we often see that I spend a lot of time on is the HPA axis. So the accumulative stress response. And remember, cortisol is a major immune modulator as well.
So one of our sponsors for the last 3 years at the Evolution of Medicine has been the Lifestyle Matrix Resource Center. And we partnered with them because we realized that in most cases, practitioner education was not being done that beautifully or effectively, and it was a critical role in building a successful practice. So here's the booth. Let's go and check out what they've got. You're very familiar with over time. We've talked a lot about the things like the group visit toolkit, but obviously here we are talking about functional immunology. So let's just take a look here at the Immune Foundation's box. And in that, you'll see, all of the education material that you can use for your practice. So like the timeline of immune development, right? How are you educating patients in how their immune system works, where it came from? All of this is, in these boxes, and these kind of tools can be used both in person with paper and virtually to educate your patients on how the immune system works and all of the stuff that you're doing in your practice. You can check out all the different things here. There's a raffle going on for some of these tools, and you can see a lot of people want to win the raffle, I guess. And also over here, you'll see all of these different books. So, Tom Guilliams wrote Supporting Immune Function, a Lifestyle and Nutrient Approach. The LMRC has all of these tools as well. Check it out, goevomed.com/LMRC. All right, I am here at PLMI with Cincinnati's finest, Dr. Steve Amores. Doc, what did you get from the session this morning?
Well, this has been a really great seminar. It's wonderful to have Jeff. I've been watching him and learning from him for the last 25 years, and he's attracted real leaders in the field, and the doctors Vojdani were great. I think one of the things that jumped out at me was that in many diseases in conventional medicine, there's always something that you'll do pretty quickly. So if someone's having a heart attack, you treat it immediately. But if you see they've got high cholesterol, high inflammation, even years before, we start treating that because there are medications for that. But what we're seeing now is a rise in autoimmune diseases. We're seeing a rise in diseases like long COVID and problems after Lyme disease and mold, where there's chronic inflammation, and people really don't know what to do about it. What's really interesting in autoimmune diseases, we see this long timeline. So you see autoimmune tests becoming positive even decades before people get sick. And yet when they go to an immunologist or rheumatologist, they get told, well, there's nothing we're going to do. We're going to wait until the disease presents itself, which is kind of scary for a patient and really not the right thing to do, because we're really not helping people early on in the disease. And I think what this whole seminar is about is learning to both see it early and then treat it. How do people get in, and then how do they get out?
Yeah, it's such a good point. Now, I've had the actual pleasure recently of coming to your practice in Cincinnati, so I see you've got an amazing setup, and I would say out of the thousands of clinics that I've walked into in my career, definitely in the top 1% as far as just organization, flow, the way that I could see everyone was working together, the types of providers you brought together. So you're doing, what Elroy and Dr. Elroy Vojdani are talking about here, you're doing every day. What is it that has kind of created the success in the operationalization of this medicine that you can speak to?
Wow. Well, we've been around for almost 23 years, and we've attracted some incredible physicians. We have a physician fellowship program, and we are developing a whole wellness-based primary care program. We see we've averaged about 30,000 patient visits a year for the last 2 decades. And so we've had a lot of experience, and we've had to learn to create team-based processes. So this is a physician-driven process, but we have a team around patients. So we have dietitians and health coaches, and very interested in the stuff that you're doing. And we want to empower patients to take control of the illness. We really want to educate them to see how they got into the illness, and then we educate them how to get out. So we look at tools for the toolbox, and we try and give them as many things as we can. What we've been, in terms of autoimmune diseases, we've really had great success, and I think the successes have bred word of mouth referrals. So of all of our referrals, the majority are word of mouth. And what we found is that there have been a lot of people whose immune diseases have simply turned off. So we have people with lupus who no longer, you can't find any evidence of it. Rheumatoid arthritis, we can't find any evidence of it. And these are wonderful. Those people go out and tell lots of their friends. And this is really what we like to do, is catch people early and then turn them around.
I know now you're, even more starting to integrate it with, with the rest of medicine. What are some ways that you found to have conversations that work with the rheumatologists of the world and the gastroenterologists about things that maybe they don't know as much?
So that's a great question. So we've always, initially we're part of a big hospital system, and then the hospital system dissolved and we became a private clinic, and now we've been back under a hospital system, a big hospital system in Cincinnati. And we've always had to learn to talk to physicians. And the way we do that is by speaking medicine first. So we always want to know what the state of the art is within medicine. And when physicians know that we know that we are speaking the same language, that we know that if they had a heart attack, they're going to get the correct treatment, and we're not spouting some absurd alternative viewpoints. Once they know that we know what mainstream is saying, then we can also start the conversation of saying, hey guys, but you are not doing well in these diseases. Yeah. And that's really where we've made our niche, because what we realized is that there's this big spectrum of medicine, and if this is illness over here, this is where most doctors and hospitals are, and this is a mythical wellness over here, this is where most people are.
Yeah.
And these are the people that really want help. And when they go to their primary care doctor or any physician, they kind of get told, well, I don't know what's wrong with you. When they come to us, and with functional medicine training, they can really learn to both see what's going on and then understand how to get in, how to get out.
Lots of wisdom there. We're here at PLMI. We've got lots of leaders from all over the country. Here with Dr. Steve Amores. Doc, thanks so much for your wisdom.
Thanks, James.
Check out the next segment. All right, we're here at PLMI. One of the speakers was Dr. Schweig, speaking about Lyme disease and some new botanicals and also sort of overall strategies for it. Doc, I know you had your lectures here today, and if you want to learn more about Dr. Schweig's ideas and his lectures, we had him a couple of months ago on the Functional Forum, but you've also been here paying attention to the Vojdanis and others. Give us a couple things about what you've learned while you've been here.
Yeah, thanks, James. It's been great to be here, to be with all these like-minded folks and the rich cross-collaboration and discussion, Dr. Bland, all these wonderful presenters. One thing that stood out for me from today's lectures was the discussion from Dr. Elroy Vojdani and his son Elroy Vojdani, Doctors Vojdani, around T-cell subsets and how we can use lifestyle interventions and botanical medicines and nutraceuticals to shift those into a better state of balance. And so just seeing the science on that and proving out the scientific background, the hard science of why these lifestyle interventions are so critical for everybody is always really, really wonderful to see.
And lots of crossover into your work.
Absolutely, yeah, because as I spoke today, our first interventions with patients are always the lifestyle piece, the nutrition side, down-regulate inflammation, sleep, movement, and to see that again proved out on the science side is just something that you can hang your hat on and feel good, even better about recommending.
All right. Well, Doc, thanks so much for participating. Really great lecture series here on chronic Lyme. You can still get the recordings of PLMI if you follow the link below. All right, we are here with Dr. Elroy Vojdani. And if you've ever been to a functional medicine conference, you know that one of the things that tends to happen is doctors will share their amazing case study to show what a great clinician they are. Doc, I wanted to ask you about the case study that you shared at the conference here, because uniquely, it was not your patient. You want to tell us the sort of story of how that went down?
Yeah, so I was very fortunate that this individual wanted to share their story with me and their documentation of everything that had happened. In my world, systemic lupus erythematosus, lupus is one of the more complicated and difficult to treat autoimmune diseases. And, she essentially came to me and said, because of the testing and the protocols that we have in functional medicine, I cured myself of lupus. I was floored by that, so I said, please do share and let's look at this data together. And I was very humbled that she wanted to share that story with me. And, essentially she had all of her records from when she was 16 years old and developed the classic symptoms of lupus, or a rash, joint pain, abdominal pain, and was treated with steroids when she was 16, sent home, and basically worked up by a rheumatologist and said, you have classic lupus. Her anti-double-strand DNA was elevated, significantly elevated ANA, and she was treated with steroids at the time. And for the 10 years that she was on steroids, she would, have moments where she was feeling great and moments where she felt rather terrible. And 10 years is a very long time to go through something like that. And that's very classic for somebody who has a very debilitating autoimmune disease. So she tells me the second half of her story, which is in 2011, she started attending functional medicine conferences and seminars.
Okay.
And she started learning about lifestyle intervention for autoimmune disease. And she's a physical therapist and a very bright one, and said, well, I'm going to implement this for myself and see what happens, essentially. She was still on medication, medication-dependent lupus at the time. And she convinced one of the other practitioners in the audience to order Cyrex testing for her.
Okay.
So she did a leaky gut panel, she did food sensitivities, she did an autoimmune predictive antibody screen, and she found out that she had gut issues and food sensitivity issues like many autoimmune patients have. And she followed the remove repair protocol and basically put herself on an anti-inflammatory diet, removed gluten, other grains, and started a gut rehabilitation program. And over the course of a year or so, she ended up essentially going from full-blown clinically active lupus to silent lupus, and then needed no further medication. And then when she had her follow-up test done a few years later, the antibodies that were present before were completely gone. So no anti-double-strand DNA anymore, no ANA, and completely in remission. And they keep on getting repeated, and she is still in remission, still completely symptom-free. And it's an incredibly powerful story and moment for me, for sure.
Yeah, it's amazing. I've always thought of this as empowerment medicine, right? But ultimately, probably lupus, if there's a list of all the issues that you could have, lupus is probably on the far end of the thing where we think, well, you definitely need the doctor for that, right? And I hear what you're saying is that when patients are armed with the right information and can access, that kind of data for themselves, and ultimately they're in charge anyway, that's possible. What does that tell you about what's possible in autoimmunity?
It's about, everybody has their own unique story in autoimmunity, and as long as someone can figure out their version of the story, they can change their path going forward. And luckily the tools, the information, the experience, all those things are there now. They're there so much that somebody could even get the information for themselves, figure out the treatment, and move forward and change the rest of their life, essentially. Lupus is one of the rare autoimmune diseases that has mortality associated with it. Patients with lupus don't live as long as other people.
Yeah.
And she completely changed that for herself.
Absolutely. So, so thanks so much for sharing that. And I guess, what do you, now that you've seen these kind of cases over and over again, what is the right balance in your mind of patient-led empowerment and physician support?
Well, clearly, I think with a practitioner involved, it's going to be a more direct path, and it takes a very, I think, special, unique person to be able to take the information, be empowered, and actually follow through with it. This patient happened to be that. The more practitioners we have leading people through the steps, the more effective this is going to be. Ultimately, I think very strongly that this should be done for everybody out there, because chronic disease is so common these days. So, The reality is in the short term, there's not enough practitioners to do that. So if people get the information for themselves and execute it, great. Hopefully in the long run, practitioners are up to date on this and we all have a resource to be able to guide us through these steps.
Beautiful. Well, look, I wanted to share this because, so often I think that we feel like these kind of cases just have so much burden on the doctor and so much burden on the healthcare system. But I thought if we can organize things in the right way, people can make a tremendous impact. Thanks so much for sharing that. Here's Dr. Vojdani. He lectured over the weekend with himself and also, with his father, and there was lots of great content. Here's some of the best bits.
We're going to talk about a case of lupus. Lupus is, in many ways, one of the most fascinating autoimmune diseases, and in many ways, one of the most stubborn and difficult to treat autoimmune diseases. Lupus is, I think, for lack of a better analogy, essentially the immune system just going nuts and wild. It is, the creation of multiple autoantibodies. We know about double-strand DNA. My dad showed us anti-ASCA. They can develop cardiolipin antibodies, immune complex C1q. Essentially the immune system is getting some kind of influx and creating a very large amount of essentially non-specific autoantibodies, and those antibodies themselves are causing the damage. This was a patient who came to me in her 50s, actually. But she came in, like many patients do, with a huge folder of prior laboratory testing and a long story, and a beautiful story. And I was very fortunate enough to be a part of this and for her to share it with me. So she was initially diagnosed with SLE at 16 years old. She experienced new onset joint pain, skin rashes, and fatigue, the very classic malar rash. She ended up in the hospital in an urgent situation, and they basically didn't know initially what was going on, but they gave her steroids, and she responded immediately and completely to them. She was discharged with outpatient therapy, and they basically continued the workup. In that workup, they identified anti-double-strand DNA antibodies at a very, very high level and essentially diagnosed her with lupus and continued to treat her with the relatively limited immune modulation that was present at that time, essentially just kept her on steroids. And she would wax and wane on and off symptomatic, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, which is pretty typical for lupus. And again, pretty typical for an autoimmune disease if you haven't identified something significant in the environment to remove for that patient and then change their destiny or course going forward. And she had these charts from when she was 16 and in the years following, showing all the laboratory testing that she had at the time. And you can see, actually we converted this into an easier to read graphical representation. This is going all the way back to April of 2001. She was positive ANA, very positive double-strand DNA, 1278, then 1493, 1329, 1128. In 2002, she dropped a bit, so her disease was going slightly or a little bit into remission, and then later on, as I'll show you, bounced up again. And continued on that way for 10 years, as I mentioned. Here in 2011, labs again, double-strand DNA, remains positive, 774. She's starting to develop very high levels of secretory IgA. That IgA level is starting to go high, right? So that's, if I'm looking at this with a time machine and going back in time, IgA is a very gut-centered antibody, so it's telling you something is going on there with the gut and gives you a clue as to that being a very important environmental piece into her continued propagation of these autoantibodies, which are wreaking havoc. Her IgMs are very low. Right? IgMs are very important for the acute response to pathogens. And now her complement levels are starting to look abnormal as well. She's got a high C3, high C4, so her innate immune system is engaged at this point and also taking its own part. The really, really fascinating part about this patient's story is that I actually had nothing to do with her resolution. I was just lucky enough for her to share the story with me, and she was, I think, one of those incredibly motivated human beings out there that just say there has to be another way, and they take it into their own hands. So she was a physical therapist, still is a physical therapist, and started attending functional medicine conferences. And she learned about Cyrex testing and learned about lifestyle intervention overall for autoimmunity, and basically just convinced the practitioner who was there attending the conference to just order laboratory testing for her. So she had, my dad will recognize this from the early days, the original array 2. And, it didn't show much. She was still on steroids at the time, right? So something to note, when you're on steroids, your B cells are going to be suppressed. You're not going to create very large amounts of antibodies to anything. But, she still has an equivocal antibody to lipopolysaccharide, IgG. So, that tells you that there's definitely something happening as far as a breakdown of the gut immune barrier, some influence into the systemic immune system happening from there. So like with most autoimmune diseases, having some kind of intervention at that gut immune barrier is going to be fruitful. She ran the original array 3, and she had an IgA antibody to whole wheat protein, gamma-gliadin 15 IgA, glutenin IgA, and she also ran the cross-reactive panel, and she had some antibodies to Polish wheat and amaranth, a few equivocals to some of the other grains, didn't have any dairy antibodies. So, I think she learned what she learned from that lecture and followed, the advice and essentially started a gut healing protocol and a gluten-free diet. It was honestly relatively basic, advanced for the time, but in today's world, relatively basic. It was probiotics, glutamine, vitamin D. She got her hands on some early versions of glutathione replacement and just took large amounts of antioxidants. And she also ran an array 5, by the way, and had a parietal cell and ganglioside antibodies. Not much on that array 5. And then she gets a new rheumatologist. Her former rheumatologist retired. And she gets her repeat panel looking at all of her lupus markers, and all of a sudden she doesn't have a positive anti-double-strand DNA anymore. And all of her symptoms completely are resolved at this point. She attended another conference, by the way, in 2021, and ran another array 5 on herself. And you see that the other, positives that were there are now no longer present. This is basically, for a 50-year-old adult, essentially as clean as it gets. So she was very successful in taking her immune system from this state of fire and activity and reacting to everything and creating all these antibodies and starting to attack her own tissue, and with a relatively simple intervention, and I think more importantly than that, empowered with this knowledge to be able to do something, changed her course and her destiny going forward. When she came to the clinic, I also ran, all of the autoimmune markers that we usually run. And she's still completely negative with all of them, a negative double-strand DNA, negative ANA, negative RNP, negative cardiolipin. I mean, her immune system looks amazing, and for the most part, she lives an incredibly normal life. So, I used to showcases, the classic anti-TPO antibodies. You put them on a gluten-free diet, you do the gut work, you see the antibodies go down. But as far as somebody's life actually completely changing from full-blown symptomatic lupus at age 16 to now an adult having no symptoms whatsoever, no disease activity, and let's not forget that is one of the autoimmune diseases that really does have mortality associated with it. That's remarkable. So a thanks to you and a thanks to Dr. Bland for paving the way and creating information for people and for making it easy for my generation to pick this up. So thank you. So again, when creating just kind of an idea of what to do, essentially on Monday morning or wherever you're going to start trying to put some of this knowledge to work, we wanted to create a flowchart essentially of how to evaluate people. Right? We're all essentially in this fight together. This remarkably rising rate of autoimmunity, immune dysfunction, autoimmunity. It's certainly not going to go in a favorable direction for us in the next few years. The more of us that are on board with this, the more of us that can do our own parts, the more effective we're going to be in really helping everybody out there. So this is meant to be, your relatively effective way to kind of work through this. So again, you run your baseline tests. You're running your early markers of autoimmunity. You have an option to take it the next level and essentially say what is going on in that gut microenvironment, right? If you're going to do some advanced work in the laboratory sense, your highest yield place, because it is so central to the immune system, so central to the mechanisms of the induction of autoantibodies is to take a look at what's happening in the gut. And you can look at the gut barrier with an intestinal permeability test, and you can also look at the state of the microbiome by looking at a stool microbiome analysis. But essentially, if you're going to do something extra, that's a really, really, really high yield good place to start. And then, of course, you want to address what it is you find, start working on the person's lifestyle, recreating a healthy gut environment, and that oftentimes is a very, very successful way to go about this. Tomorrow I'll be giving you, in my humble years on the clinical side of things, the things that I have seen be very high yield, quote unquote game changers in my practice as far as how to make those lifestyle changes. And a reminder again what the mechanism is here, just so, I don't think we can understand this enough and go through this enough. I'm going to take the example of Neuromyelitis Optica and aquaporin and kind of specifically talk about that, all right? So essentially what's occurring here is your immune system, through this disruption of the gut barrier and the channels that are broken down and allow for this gut disruption to occur, all work on the zonula occludens pathway and the tight junctions as part of the paracellular membrane of this very complicated single cell layer that lives in the small intestine. That breakdown can happen for tons and tons and tons and tons of reasons in today's world. But essentially, one event will come along that will take a predisposed gut immune barrier, take it from functioning enough and put it over its tipping point to where the barrier itself becomes open. There is now an increase in influx of proteins and antigens making their way to the immune system on the other side. There is an influx of bacteria, virus, yeast that normally live within the intestinal microenvironment making its way into the bloodstream on the other side. The immune system is going to be under tremendous attack. It's going to send out large amounts of inflammatory signaling, and this very unfortunate vicious cascade is going to begin. And that goes on for 3, 10, 15, 20 years, depending on the autoimmune disease, depending on the condition, and then you end up with the development of autoantibodies. In the case of that patient with lupus, she had double-strand DNA and a positive ANA. Her C1Qs were normal, her RNPs were normal, her ASCAs were normal. It was, really just those two autoantibodies. And in certain individuals and with a certain amount of time, those autoantibodies can absolutely wreak havoc. So doing something that's gut-centered is pulling somebody out of this vicious cycle, giving the immune system a chance to breathe and reset, giving the immune system a chance to not see so many of those antigens, and have an opportunity to breathe a little bit, calm the inflammatory cascade down, and then seal that barrier back up, which it otherwise would never get the opportunity to do. I think that's the way I think about this when anybody comes into the clinic, really just trying to break that cycle at the gut. And that's why the gut is so central to everything when we talk about the systemic immune system. So in the case of neuromyelitis optica, you have a patient with an aquaporin producing B cell, let's say. So they've got these aquaporin antibodies flowing around in their bloodstream. They're attacking the blood-brain barrier. They're making their way into the CNS, attacking water channels there. Doing something gut-centered may not initially make sense here, but it makes absolute sense when you think about it through this model. You want to pull everything that the immune system is seeing that it thinks may look like that aquaporin it's attacking. It cannot tell the difference between a food aquaporin and the body aquaporin that it's attacking. I think that's the spirit of molecular mimicry. It's making these mistakes because it wasn't designed to be so specific at looking at 100% similarity between the protein structures. So if you just change the environment so it doesn't have the opportunity to make that mistake, it can repair this whole thing, reduce the amount of B cell antibodies being produced, reduce the disease activity, give the whole thing a chance to reset, and give the person, again, breathing room, metabolic resilience, immune resilience, again, going forward. This slide is up there just because I want everybody to remember that we started off with 5 A's. autism spectrum disease, ADHD, allergies, Alzheimer's, and autoimmune disease. We are talking specifically about autoimmune disease, but this whole thing is relevant to all 5 of those A's. The other A that we're experiencing a very unfortunate epidemic of in Western developed countries is Alzheimer's disease. Right? If you look at the current amount of people diagnosed with clinical Alzheimer's disease, conservative estimates are going to be 7 to 8 million people. It's a relatively small number in the grand scheme of things. It's an absolutely horrible way to live the last portion of your life. Everything that could be done to stop that should be done. It is very similar to autoimmune disease in that it has a very, very large window in which the abnormality develops and then the disease develops, which means on the plus side, though many people are silently going through this process, it gives us a tremendous window of opportunity to jump in, intervene, and change that person's destiny. The 2019 study out of UCLA was a very, very rigorous statistical study to try to identify how many Americans are in preclinical Alzheimer's, which means they're on that road. They have absolutely no idea. We don't have any blood testing for them. We don't have an imaging study for them. We have no way to tell them that they are on that road at the moment. It was 42 million people, 15% of the population. So this gut-centered lifestyle intervention, if you want to start putting together autoimmune disease and people who are on the road to Alzheimer's and they don't even know it, you're approaching 50% of the population. So the importance of this cannot be stressed enough. Luckily for everybody in this room, you have the desire to learn more and do something about it, and I thank you all for being a part of that.
All right, so if you have been following the Functional Forum in the last year, you've heard Dr. Jill Carnahan talk about environmental toxins live in Boulder, and then talk about mold a couple months ago. And those were the 2 things that you were speaking about here at this conference, Jill. But I guess I wanted to come into what you spoke in your last slides there about fear and risk and the role of those 2 in healing. So how did you start to realize that these played an important role, and what role do both of those play in recovering from a chronic illness?
So important. It's a place that we don't want to go, and it's a place that we typically try to avoid. But what I was sharing at the end of my lecture was my experience on the 3rd Flatiron, my first rock climb ever, and I was freaking terrified. And I wanted to use it as an analogy to encourage not only clinicians, but patients, because the comfort zone is not where we grow. It's not where we find exciting discoveries, and it's certainly not where we see change or healing or growth. It's always outside. If we could think of it as concentric circles, that comfort zone is not where we find these new discoveries. So I was actually saying that when you feel fear, let that be a compass of the direction you need to head. You actually use that as a guide. If I feel a little bit of fear here, that's probably where I need to go.
Yeah.
And I think it's relevant for clinicians. It was relevant because we are, I feel like we're the Navy SEALs. We're like the special trained forces for the tsunami of the kind of illness we're going to see, which is infection and toxin and the combination on the immune system. So being ready for that, learning like we did today, and learning how to deal with complex chronic illness is on that edge, because our colleagues are standing back here and they're like doing what's safe, what they've always done, but what they've always done is not working. So we have to do something different. For a patient, it's going to be, okay, I'm going to try this new treatment. I'm going to try this new protocol. I'm going to take some foods out of my diet like soy or gluten or wheat or dairy or some of these allergens that can cause autoimmunity. And it may be scary because it's different, it's new, and it requires a risk. But usually healing, I'll just give you an example of my case, James. I had breast cancer at 25. The doctor sat in they called it morbidity and mortality rounds. How's that for a name?
Wow.
And they took the toughest cases. And at that time, I was the youngest one ever diagnosed with breast cancer at Loyola. And they took my case and they presented it among a board of doctors to decide what my treatment protocol would be. And they gave me an incredibly toxic 3-drug regimen of chemo, surgery, radiation, the whole wax, ball of wax. And what I did was I went and did the research, and I said, what do the statistics show? And some of the things they were recommending showed no increase in mortality, so no change in death, maybe 2 months more to live. And I was like, if that's going to affect the quality of my life and not give me any more years to live, I'm not going to do it. So what I did at 25 was I took a risk. I went and found this new doctor who was doing a brand new type of radiation in Wisconsin. And I said, will you do this for me? It's experimental.
Yeah.
And it saved my life. So some of the things I did as a patient were the same way of doing things that were maybe new, maybe different, maybe they haven't been around for 30 years. But the kind of things we're dealing with now, James, they require a new perspective.
They do. You know, I think so much of conventional medicine is sort of built on that fear relationship. And ultimately, you know, what's happening here in salutogenesis is empowerment. So how do you flick that switch for patients who are just used to being in the old mindset?
Well, there's this connective tissue because we're taught in medical school to be objective and to not engage with a patient. And God forbid you shed a tear. That's old school. I come into that encounter as a human being first, as an ally, and as someone who's been in the trenches with illness. I know what it's like. Now, I don't go telling them all my story or making it about me, but if there's something that's relevant that I can say, you know what, I remember when I had mold-related illness and, you know, I was losing my hair and my skin was all rashy. It's really hard, isn't it? And you just get that human connection back in medicine because all they want to know is, number one, is there hope? Number two, does she hear me? Is she listening? And number three, am I alone? It's some really basic core human things. And when you get that trust, they'll do anything that you help them with. And so then they're willing to make that change. But I think it's first putting aside that white coat objective, not engaging with them as a human, and just being human.
So glad to hear you say that because, you know, I know when you first did the Functional Forum, this is back in 2016, it was like very detailed, like gut labs, I think. And, you know, what my experience of being in this industry for a long time is that the people who have been doing this for a long time, over time, they sort of have slightly less focus on that and slightly more focus on the human element because they recognize that getting people into action and participation and getting over fear and ready to take a risk is actually really where the leverage lies for the medicine. And so, you know, even in our, you know, history of our connection, I just feel like I've seen you, you know, step into that. And what do you recommend for doctors, I guess, who, you know, it's one thing to flick it on for the patients, but how do you engage that for a doctor who is used to being in a paradigm where you don't have to do that?
Yeah, it does take a different level. It's vulnerability, really, right? And what is human connection without vulnerability? There's none. And we think of it maybe in like romantic relationships or parent-child relationships or other types of things outside of medicine, but it's no different. It's human-to-human relationships. And really all drivers of change and healing start with that human connection. Am I heard? Am I valuable? Am I, you know, is there hope? All those basic core needs. And if we can sit there and be with them in that, and they feel heard and they feel acknowledged and that they feel like there's some hope, and that builds the trust. I was just talking to someone before I left the main hall after the lecture. Where do you start? What do you do? And I said, I always think about what's one thing I can do at this first visit that I know will help. And that might be the only thing that I do. But they're going to come back and say, oh, Dr. Chill, what you told me to do worked.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you have the trust currency.
Yeah.
And then the next thing you do might be harder, might involve more supplements or a deeper protocol. But so when you're in that first visit, you want to say, how can I build trust in a genuine way? And it's hearing them, listening to them, repeating back what they're saying. It's being human first, not doctor second. And then the third thing is finding an intervention where you can build trust because you know that that's going to help them. And once they buy in, they're there and like, I'll do whatever you do, whatever you want me to do. And then it's an easy relationship because they trust you, you trust them, and you're moving forward together. But that trust is huge.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And now I just see, you know, in so many cases I've found that doctors who focus on the protocol first, and when they haven't built that trust, those people end up in, you know, sort of calling coaches or other practitioners because they're like, look, I've got this great protocol and I know that it would help me, but they're just not in the action phase and they haven't built, you know, that layer of trust. So really excited to, you know, to just, you know, hear that in your journey. So obviously, you know, you've been here at this conference and it's all been on the sort of the cross section of like functional immunology. I guess knowing what you know now and experiencing everything that you've experienced, how critical is this whole conversation to the future of medicine?
James, this is the future of medicine. I stood up there and said how I simplify functional immunology, all this stuff we're talking about, is toxic load, infectious burden. We have this tsunami of toxic load in our environment that's only getting worse. Exponential increase in putting chemicals into the environment, the changes in soil we talked about, which affect our food supply, which affect our immune system, and then infectious component. And the infections by themselves have been around forever, but all of a sudden we have a new one called COVID, and it's here, and it's here to stay, and about 20 to 30% of people who've had it have long-term sequelae. So we are seeing the tip of the iceberg, the tip of the tsunami of what's coming, and the classical training in conventional medicine is not equipped to deal with this. So we have to go deep with what we talked about at this conference, which is how do these toxins, infections play a role on dysfunctional immunity, and how do we reverse that? I mentioned my old title of the book, which is not current, was Reversible Autoimmunity, because it's this idea that, oh wait, this doesn't have to be forever. There are interventions and things that we can do to change the immune system, and actually, for example, type 1 diabetes or Crohn's disease, both of which I've experienced, gone.
Yeah.
And I was told they're irreversible.
Totally. Yeah, such a good point. Well, look, we're going to have some of the best bits from Jill's lecture coming up here at the Functional Forum. Jill, thanks so much for fighting the good fight. We're excited about all the awesome things you have coming up here in the next year. We got the docu-series, we got the book, and just grateful to know you and excited to see you treading that path forward to the future of medicine. Thank you.
Thank you, James. It's mutual. Love all the work you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in here with us at the Functional Forum. I hope you've learned a lot. I certainly did. We'll be back next month with another great forum. It'll be the second Monday in July because of the holiday. We look forward to seeing you then. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.